Bhagavato Arahato Dhamma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Dhamma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Araham Dhamma Sambuddho Visasana Dhammano Sugato Loka Vidu Nodro Purita Dhamma Dharati Tadadiva Manutanam Buddho Bhagava Bhagavato Bhagavata Namo Nandetiko Agadiko Devadiko Oganiko Yasada Veditako Vinyuri Topari Pano Bhagavato Tavagatango Usapari Pano Bhagavato Tavagatango Nyaya Paripano Bhagavato Tavagatango Namisa Paripano Bhagavato Tavagatango Yadidam Satari Purita Yugani Aga Purita Bhogara Yeta Bhagavato Tavagatango Ahuniyo Bahuniyo Yakiniyo Insarikaraniyo Nodram Punyakita Lokata Ewa Mudram Dharanam Dhammanam Yasa Bhagavo Peyawa Sambhitadawa Doma Anto Naetati Omadu Tava Mingala Ragandu Tava Devata Tava Bodhanu Bhavina Taratuki Bhavandude Omadu Tava Mingala Ragandu Tava Devata Tava Dhammanu Bhavina Taratuki Bhavandude Omadu Tava Mingala Ragandu Tava Devata Tava Dhammanu Bhavina Taratuki Bhavandude Kavitiyo Vivasandu Gokorogo Vinagadu Made Bhavanundaraya Tuki Digayuko Bhava Vivadana Dineta Nesavoda Pasayino Sadaro Dhamma Vodhangi Ayu Mano Tutambalam Sadhu
Tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa samvityo vivajjanto Samverogo vinasato mati bhavantarayo sukhi dikayuko bhavetu sabda mangalam Rakhantu sabda jivata sabda mundanu bhavina sada sunti bhavantu te bhavetu sangha mangalam Kantu sambuddhivata sambuddhamma bhavine sasunti bhavantu te bhavetu sangha mangalam Kantu sambuddhivata sabba sanghanubhavine sada sunti bhavantu te aviromi India Panjomi Amigitomi Sukhi Adudanam Harikarami Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti pisu bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vichacharana sampan sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhammasarati satta deva manusa buddho bhagava te Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sandidhiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachat Vedita Puvinyohi Ti Supatipanno Bhagavat Savakasang Ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Nyayapatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Samicipatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Yadidam cattari purisa yugani atta purisa bhugala Esa bhagavato savaka sangho ahuneyo pahuneyo dakineyo anjali karaniyo anuttarang punyaket lokasa ti bhavatu sabbha mangalang rakantu sabba devata Sabba buddhanupavena sadaso bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhave sadaso te bhavantu bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata Sabha Sanghanu Bhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Sabbe Sata Bhavantu Sukhitata Sabbe Dukkha Pamujantu. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you.
야, 다들이 니만 이버디 그냥 아주 양자도스 다 초기열이 엔다 가서 시스버너시 아니 산재배 최디 다 대마 롱아도 네그리사시 또 순열이 다 간다 런이도 다 하시 또 심어리 세다 시 주로蒙古시 야지 야제 주야의 야마 구주야로 되게 다 용되게 요래 산재외 최디 패실 때부 수신내려 소리지 다 하고 드리께서 애네 누축 유주나나 당아 애네 산재외 최 매세 유르스 알로네 도나로 체대하지 용되게도가 사진지기 뒤줄이야 말아서데 로동자가 전된되게 전장 남아 인데고 말아서다 지기 그게 내주 시베타네 에 맞아도 투뭉 에 전된되게 취주디 자볼리디가래야 제 안도보도 내가 여디디 그게 무튼이 나야다 양지 벌거 냠버도 되리 지금 냠버 소추트야지本来家伙不要送给유주靠蒙古去了벌거 때문에倒是냠요래当然第一也是냠버 소추 민요 공부 용돼야지 신내 디물람 저 되게 에 철로 넘어져요 대공부장 엔 대민기다 대가산제 외쳐 저 매도도 저기 산제 외쳐 나로리아 심강 리베 거도 저다 에네 뜻중 거도 저디 비쇼지기다 다시부터 띵서우신 예외인들산에 야 최대 유명한 모델에 도나징에 용되게 요래 다 들으지기 뒤주대 말아서 냐라 좀 된되게 전화 직교인부터 야 말아서 성월로 지 파수식 저치야디 그래서 투도 그다 숙처를 다네 아니 다 남지 쇼다로 제외는 빨리 주유다 레자기 주유전에 다 도시열에 저사에네 그런 거라도 또서 지금 저 융자를 소리지 다 가서 빨리 주유다 아니 레자기 주유 엔디 가서 망스프게다 저런이 지하로 죽나 판도된데 연구를 다들 그 도시들이야 매 타일랜드 그게 야 지기 디네로 춘주시도 열에 나대 사가시 심벌이 또 뒤에서로 쟤는 아주 다 지 빨리 취준생에다 레자가 취준생에서 아주 지기 저도 보고 서로 가지다 아니 혈류 제세 아니 졸랭 진짜 제도나 단대 판도 연구를 And that's a Tridanda Trapani Shagando. Nadi.
Today we are meeting for the second day, and it's wonderful to meet with you again here. We are all followers of one and the same Buddha, and we spoke about some of the key aspects of the Buddha's teaching yesterday. And generally, there is the understanding in the Buddhist texts that the Buddha's teaching will last for 5,000 years on this earth. And already more than 2,000 years have passed. So of course, historically, if you look across human history, we will see different religious traditions come into being and at some point decline and disappear and so on and so forth. But we are now living through a time where actually, if you look at the history of the Buddhist tradition as a whole seems to be actually quite stable, quite firm. And especially in the historically traditional Buddhist countries, like all of us, we have been followers of the Buddha for over 1,000 years in each of our traditions. So in these traditional Buddhist countries, the Buddhist tradition is very strong. And furthermore, we are now living through a time where there is a growing interest in Buddhism and Buddha's teaching in the West as well, which historically has not been a place where the Buddha Dharma has flourished. So in this kind day and age, when there is a growing interest in different parts of the world beyond the historically traditional Buddhist countries and societies, it is important, I feel, on the part of us who are followers of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha, and students of the Buddha historically, to be able to really think beyond our own individual specific traditions and think of Buddha Dharma as a whole, and think about how the Buddha Dharma as a whole could continue flourish. And part of that, it is important for the followers of the Buddha, the students of the Buddha, to have closer understanding, closer contact. And of course, it is very desirable, but to be honest, up to this point, the relationship and the contacts could be done more. We could see better contacts, more contacts. And part of that contact has to involve deeper appreciation and understanding of each other's traditions, and which may involve through communication, dialogue, so on and so forth. So here, that's one thing that I would really like to suggest. And then, on my part, I also pray that the Buddha Dharma continues for a long time. And there are parts of the world, including, Tibet, China, and Mongolia, in historically Buddhist regions where, due to tragic situations, Buddha Dharma has declined due to, external, internal factors. And in these areas, on my part, I pray that the Buddha Dharma that has declined be revived and flourish. And on your part as well, as fellow Buddhist, in your prayer, please remember the fellow Buddhists who are suffering in these different parts of the world where historically Buddhist traditions flourished, but now are going through decline. And so please pray for this. And and furthermore, I feel that generally when we talk about the followers of the Buddha, I talk broadly in terms of two major traditions, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. And that's one way of looking at the two main streams of Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist tradition that survives today. And the dialogue between these two are important. For example, on my part, I visit the Bodh Gaya temple quite often, the stupa quite often, and there is a Thai temple and a monastery there. And as part of my pilgrimage to the Bodh Gaya, I also have the opportunity to interact with the Thai fellow Buddhists over there. So these kind of dialogue, I think, is really important. And for these dialogues, we actually also need to be more patient, to allow more space so that one can really delve deeper into understanding each other's interpretation of the Dharma. And also one thing that we have to remember is that in many parts of the world, beyond people who are taking interest in Buddhism as a religious teaching, there are also many people in the world who are looking at Buddhism for its deep psychology, teachings on philosophy, the science of mind, and not necessarily relating to Buddhism as a religion, but Buddhism as a source of knowledge, as a source of teaching, as a source of insight. And in this kind of time, I think it is important for us, Buddhists, while helping fellow Buddhists to continue to flourish the Dharma, but also serve this broader community, the secular world, where people are looking at Buddhism as a source of spiritual resources, teaching, insights, and so on. So I think the key point here is that we need more interaction and contact among ourselves first.
Oh yeah, 当然了的，这么影响很多的嘛，我的还是龙，他是成个就的，的的嘛是到处录音的，巴黎街头马斯的，巴扎那苏的，拍街头这么影响是不多全部，南无大师巴嘎瓦多阿拉哈多三亚三不得谁，今天的扎上不一样的，我左边上去，带了叉车路数，这个大概对不？最近的今天的，这每年都，这每年把那么就装的，干嘛说，达嘛学校啊那学所，他的今天的就给弄那了干啥吧？给弄到。这说是给龙得到，那么就中间的了社网，什么学说，中间的人这个是干啥吧？给龙的，甚至那不他不叫我的两人当明暗的把打来，阳的往打我叫我的，东面我的，一面的我的，那不叫我的，日个去到我叫我的，两人人打我。무슨 도 자야지 저거 집에 남는 DNDS 어다 간다電子送이야기 동해 시와서 꾸주 빠서 고봉원도 자야겠다 고den원도 자야지 송구도가 에네 간다 냐라 녀몽문주 봐도 고내야지 르마 이승구 니주 라고조 직동 되는 조조 에네 가다 생로던 요다네 에네 띵지글레 시체 에네 시르글라와 담에다고 시르글라와 곰니 에네 가다 생로야 요태야지기 어디 숨기요래 라고 숨기냐네 사진제 인도 명한테 뭐 달래 양다 원다가 저거도 동요도 이메도도 누버 저거도 리퀘츠 또버 저거도 양에 랜다 무슨도 저버시고 라면 디인디스 강 대니 저번 영어 서버 시우스 시우 강신의 결론다 데르 결론 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다. 이 메데와 넘버 3에 룰을 제수 다신 나왔다. 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다. 이 메데와 넘버 3에 초나와 제수 다신 나왔다. 뜸보 시신 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다. 이 메데와 넘버 3에 성로 제수 다신 나와다. 뜸보 시신 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다. 이 메데와 넘버 3에 철로 제수 다신 나서 결론다. 지들 결론이 lulu luji jesu tashin nasam kelon da dina kelon ne gombor son ham xingzhu du son ham kangdo du son di kimu zhong jie de lu changbo sangxin chanbo chanbo ka chao de nasos da nghe là lưu gần tụ lụ đi đi chỉ cái năm nào cái chuyện tình đi sai được xong cái đó 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 thì nó做ngã này mình đồ de à就是这样的做的意义上了大呢我这算在的他们nghe là kim mu zhu jie de lưu长不上去长不卡巧的那时候对呢禅性的物不是我的禅性的物创制的物人都弄呢物人都无所念的养的我其实我是说的写说物人都冲呢物人都冲我念的养的我其实我是说的写说物通我们呢物通无所念的养的我其实我是说的写说物通冲呢物通冲我念的养的我其实我是说的写说吕给他们这养的我良心无所念的老是吕给他们这养的我良心不我念的老是都是吕给都是新的讲呢无所念的老是都吕给都是新的讲呢冲我念的老是都给老的在这边呢啥个一年呢开外胖了过完呢人都说那样人都说我念的肉都写说通过说那样通过说我念的肉都写说给老的特性都给老呢人都我呢人都我说念的样的我其实我是说的写说人都冲那样人都冲我念的样的我其实我是说的写说通过我呢通过我所念的样的我其实我是说的写说通过冲呢通过冲我念的样的我其实我是说的写说理解他们这样的我良心我所念的老不切的理解他们这样的我心嘛的理解他们这样的我良心碰我念的老不切的理解都是新的讲呢我所念的老不切的理解都是新的讲呢冲我念的老不切的但是呢哪个理解结束大学那边有呢去了理解结束大学那边有呢排解哪个律师的物体送给有说的去了理解结束大学那边有呢哪的去了理解那理解结束大学那边的理了根据确实结束确实结束大学那边的理了几个确实结束大学那边理了根据我的几个结束大学那边有呢他了理有的念头其实你就写吧上当说差不多上说差不多上都差不多鸟那边就是但不没办法但今天呢看样鸟了嘛没记住给老的他这给老呢理解结束大学那边给老的想样给老呢着那打着我娘都手都写说他不单独晨曦这样的送过多啊그다 파유 전에 선 진리기 저랑 가르쳐도 돼 돈하게 매버신이 강연을 당 매버셔 리기 저랑 가르쳐 나게 맞춰 가르쳐 조조 이게 남도 강조가 되디 전식 선보시는 저거레스 어디 송도 저는 다 정원념도 저도 싶어 누구나 다 누구냐도 저도写소 냐와나 다 냐로냐도 저도写소 대일륜이 지저 저도 잡고 되네 대저 저도写소 대저로 난게 륜을 륜이写소 다시 내봐다 치륜을 륜이写소 다시 내봐다 난게 륜을 치륜을 Luji Jesuta Shendabata, Lula, Kundunjun, Church Jesuta Shendabata, Lula, Jibi Church Jesuta Shendabata, Lula, Kunjunwa, Jibi Jesuta Never yendo. Tell Lu Yodo, Yam, Chisi, Nidu, Shebason, the Susu, Chabason, the Chaban Yawa, never Dushin. Tababa never Jidena, Kaya, Yawa, Lama, Michitu, Gelonda, Tada, Gelon, Lula, Luji Jesuta, never yendo. Gelonda, Shanyang, Geloni, draw the Toba, Shishin to Chebata, Juse Debata, number Deva, Shishin to Chebata, Kubata, Jao, Shishin to Chebata, Namjata, Sugar, the Lucy, Jao, Shishin to Chebata, Servata, Tonga, Chebata, Nyangwa, Shishin to Chebata, Shawa, the Jivele, Shishin to Chebata, Sawata, Deva, Jawata, Dubata, Nyawata, Minyawata, Mawata, Mimawan, Shishin to Chitata, Nanga Lula, Galonda, Tata Galonda, Lula, Chess, Lula, Luigi Jesuta, never you know, Galonda, Shanyang, Galon, Ki, Ni Lu, Dinila, Gangbe Ti Yenche, Jatang Go, Menshena, Babalo Tuba, Mizan, Nazo, Yakan, Yandaba, Chida Washington, Susu Dotis, that Lu Mizan Ranshima, Rada, any, don't give a Ranshim, but you do just salon calling Burba. 나가다 르 도쟁기 님이 삼 대내 파 대인도 군중기 아니 sem그 초에 타네 아니 sem 두모 되고요 다 디디도 셰윤도 달라 녀보 여더메 녀보 땐도 여더메 녀보 때 여나 녀보 컨디스텐 고예메 어다 디디 그림 뭐네 뭐는 좀 뭐지 그 그림 레도가
So, so let me read a little bit from the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. So the sutta begins with the preamble, setting the context where the sutta was discourse was given. So this is in the land of Kurs, in a place called Karmasadama. And then the sutta opens with the statement in exchange between the Buddha and the Sangha members who were there. And then the first opening of the sutta after the preamble sets up a very important passage where the Buddha says that there is amongst this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, for the realization of Nibbana. That is to say, the four foundations of mindfulness. So in this opening sentence or a passage, the core of the Buddha's teaching is summed up, particularly what is the final goal of the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma. The final goal of the Dhamma is the attainment of cessation in the form of Nibbana. And here, and the way, the actual path by which one attains that Nibbana is articulated in the form of, although not explicitly stated here, but in the form of what is known as the Threefold Training. And the Threefold Training is a very progressive practice where we begin with first restraining the gross levels of negative actions of body, speech, and mind by applying mindfulness and clear knowing, awareness. And then by applying these two faculties, we begin to exercise restraint on the expressions of the afflictions, such as attachment, anger, and so on. So the first level is application of these on the level of body and speech. And then we move on to the next practice, which is the second training, which is the training in concentration. And the concentration, at that point, we are now beginning to deal with our mind beyond body and speech. We're dealing with the mind. And part of that training involves first cultivating the ability to apply our mind and attain some attentional focus. So that's part of the training. And the concentration or samadhi is like the basis, the foundation. And the actual practice is really prajna, wisdom. And then the wisdom of no self, or wisdom of shunyata, emptiness, is the core content. The essence of the path is really the wisdom, the training in wisdom. So this opening passage really presents this entire path in an implicit way by pointing out what is the ultimate goal of the Dhamma, the path of Dhamma. So then Buddha goes on to explain what the four foundations of mindfulness practice are. He begins by explaining the importance of adopting the right body posture, finding a quiet place for practice, and finding, sort of first beginning to discipline your body and adopt a certain posture so that you can settle your mind. And then the practice goes on to first the introduction to the mindful breathing, the mindful breathing. And the mindful breathing is explained in a quite detailed way by bringing awareness to the actual act of breathing in, breathing out, breathing in long, breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out, out short. So every time we breathe, depending upon the pace of the breath, you maintain your awareness. So the two faculties that are being applied here are sati or smriti, mindfulness, and samprajñana, which is the meta-awareness, or sometimes translated also as clear awareness. So these are the two faculties that are being applied in focused on the breath. And then the text then goes on to explain about, how by choosing, taking the breath as the object of meditation, one begins to then bring deeper awareness and mindfulness, and then contemplation of body as body, and abiding with that mindfulness. And then the text moves on to explaining the importance of how we need to bring that mindfulness and awareness, not only when we are sitting in a practice, but also in everyday life. And then it talks about the four postures of the body: when lying down, when standing up, when moving, and when sitting down. So, and it goes into detail, but the point here is that the mindfulness and meta-awareness or samprajñana has to be applied constantly, because we know from our personal experience that a lot of the problems and mental agitations really come when we are not able to exercise some discipline on our mind. We let our mind to run free, run without discipline, unrestrained, and then all sorts of problems arise. So although paying attention to the body is important, and the attention to the body is a way of training your mind, so that ultimately the main aim is to really apply mindfulness and meta-awareness on the mind itself, moving from body to feeling, then to mind. So I think this is where, and then in the sutta, example is given, how do we train this awareness? And one of the examples given here is how a potter, an expert potter, spins the wheel and is aware that whether he has spin hard, which would spin for long, whether he has spin short, which will spin for less time. And the potter, through the expertise, knows what kind of spinning he or she has done. So in the same manner, a meditator will be able to maintain the mindfulness and meta-awareness in a disciplined manner. So in this way, what is happening here is the instruction to us that we need to apply mindfulness and awareness, at the level of our body, at the level of our speech, in relation to our speech, and most importantly, in relation to our mind, in relation to our mind. So as part of the, mindfulness on the body, there is also a more detailed explanation on how we can do this by, looking at different aspects of the body, different constituents that make up our body, and not only listing them, but also reflecting upon their nature as, foulness and made of, impure substances. And the point here is to really remind us the truth of suffering. the existence in samsara is conditioned by suffering. So the truth of suffering, and the truth of suffering, by reflecting on suffering, it will lead to inquiry into what is the origin of suffering. Why are we in this situation where we are now? And through inquiring into the origin of suffering, we will find that the origin of suffering lies not outside, it lies within us. It's in our mind, it's in our emotions. So once we recognize that, then the question is asked, is there a way to bring about an end to the origin of suffering, thereby bringing an end to the suffering? And that opens up to the question of asking about nibbana or cessation, nirodha. And in this way, what you find here is actually an approach that is very close to the actual way things work in the world. This whole kind of approach of the path is the suffering and its origin, searching for its cure, and the healing, and where does that healing come from, which is the path. And in this way, if you think about the teaching of the Buddha as encompassed in this kind of teaching, there is something very remarkable that is actually very close to the way reality itself is.
소소 타면 도디 아주 지 양원 망고 소송 그돌이야 냐다 잘해요나 링시점때 신 혈려요나 아니 지금 판바 연제 상마 연제 도 썼던야지 아니 꼭 보면 그돌이야 아니 야네 그돌이야 소소 타면 도 개버를 동고를 신도 순요리 세상 아래만의 차샤네 소소타면 도디 차상 스비 전에다 아니 마타 임베 야네 거돌이야 도제버디 도스타야지 또 대가다 에네 갤롱기 지금 로차 녀도 베데 쉬우지 14호지 송도가 어디디 소소타면 도 제버디 아주 소송 거돌이야 자신이 이제 던거야 지기 로다도스래 다 되게 개롱기 제 로차 년도 저些참물로지나 소인 것도가 다 들으시래.
So, talking about this importance of applying mindfulness and, awareness to everyday activity, particularly for the monastic members, here it is important to recall that as part of our monastic vows, every fortnightly, we have to participate in a confession ceremony. So the tradition is during the confession ceremony, the abbot, the senior Sangha member has to recite the Pratimoksha Sutra. And if there is a rush, at least the preamble part of the Pratimoksha Sutra has to be chanted, if possible, the entire sutra. And so in the Tibetan tradition, during the fortnightly ceremony, and regardless of whatever version of length it is, the Pratimoksha Sutra is chanted. And the 13th Dalai Lama, my predecessor, actually really kind of emphasized to the monastic community that at least during the rainy season retreat, at least once the entire long Pratimoksha Sutra should be chanted as part of the confession ceremony. And this is something that I do. I also had the opportunity to memorize the whole Pratimoksha Sutra myself. And at least once a year during the rainy season retreat, I chanted in the congregation. So if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra, it's very detailed in the way in which monastic members are advised to bring mindfulness and awareness into everyday activity. It lists literally all the aspects of activity among a monastic member engages in. It's very detailed. So these really are, of course, explaining the precepts, but the most importantly, it is explaining how it is important to maintain awareness and mindfulness as a monastic member throughout our day and night, by applying these kind of faculties to our everyday action.
Yane Kodulo, Soso Talon, Dojava, Dongore, Saji, those Tempem Nang Yins. Shan and Narian Masana, Chijan Sambor, Minjuros, Edit Lavia, Samlia, Ligitus, Shani, or Kunduku Home, the Ligum Sledge, Shasha the Jan, the Sunsha. Shana or the Nady, Soso Talon, Dojava, the Lord Sin. And Pearl Sajik Nishtambere. And catch at the dancers of many Yana Kodulon, Dojo, never to Dongores and those Kokome, the Temple number. Chanangazota, Yana Kodulia, dancers soon could Sunday, she the dancer Chavazo, Yana Kodulo, so that Dojo, Marton and Martanachi.
So
Denala Kandachi draw cha nian du the Galons Shadi the ships how she was a song the wa or that day so do as a lot of sin and Shake Mata Yimbe Yane Kadula Dojava Chazan Shimatu Sungaji, the Kashaburisha.
So this is a kind of a story, but it was my own late tutor, Gyabje Rinpoche, who was informed by the 13th Dalai Lama, the predecessor, the Dalai Lamas, who told Lingrim Rinpoche that one of the things that the 13th Dalai Lama has done is to really institute the tradition that the major monasteries should at least once a year during the rainy season retreat have the senior member recite the long Pratimoksha Sutra. And the important point here is that when you recite the Pratimoksha Sutra, you cannot read it. You have to chant it from heart. So whoever is going to be the senior member who chants the Pratimoksha Sutra, it has to be done from heart. That's the historical tradition. So in my own case, I was able to do it once in Tibet before we left. But in India, I've had the opportunity to chant this several times. And I also have asked the major monastic universities in the Tibetan community, particularly the three large monastic universities that are re-established in South India, as well as many other major monasteries. I have asked them to make sure that the tradition that the 13th Dalai Lama has established to have the extensive Pratimoksha Sutra chanted by heart by the senior member during the rainy season retreat be observed. So this is what is happening here today, which I'm happy to know. But the point is that if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra as a fully ordained monk, you will recognize that how many aspects of the Pratimoksha Sutra are instructions on how, as a fully ordained monk, one should live one's life on a daily basis, and what kind of mindful awareness one needs to bring in every aspect of the activity in one's life.
The Kembu, Nyanzo, Hasa, Sojong Kutu, Kembu, Kembu Rang Lolia, because it turned to Martin, didn't did the motu, did Lola Mabba to Teddy, and the woman, Neden Devichilia, the Soro Nas Jenny, or the Dukes enemy, Kuyong Shadow. Shea, Nazoda, ya, Kasha in, Sosavan Dojava, Dungus, and the distinguishment better than the Dungus. At the end, there's a lot of salary.
So, given that the tradition historically is for the chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra be done from heart by the senior member of the monastic congregation, there is also quite a liberal tradition where if the senior member is not able to chant the entire sutra, but there will be others who will pick up where the senior member and the abbot left. So it's not as if one person should be able to chant the entire sutra from heart, from start to finish, but the sutra needs to be chanted in full, and it needs to be chanted from the heart. So that has been the tradition. So sometimes I do hear some Tibetan monasteries saying that we also observe this tradition of having the long sutta chanted during the summer retreat, rainy season retreat. But then they say, and then when I ask them, who memorizes it? They said, no, we actually read it from the text. So that's not really how it was historically, the tradition.
Oh yeah. Also gelonzu ene soso taban dodi lolia sinche. Oda de yango mango soson kodolia kuzu tudugi ma kembu ma song en di yang chodi di ene de ne de woma di tu sungche. Di kashim sharisha.
So this, just to repeat, emphasize, I think this tradition that is part of the monastic life of fortnightly chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra, and especially when it's chanted the long version, that the senior member, the abbot starts, and then where the senior member abbot needs to take a rest, another elder member takes over. But and this tradition of chanting the Pratimoksha Sutra, at least during the fortnightly ceremony, I think is a beautiful one, and we should make sure that it remains that way.
Yeah, that day and Chamanishak and call Teta Nanga Lulu Gelonda, Teta Gelona Lulu Lugi Jesu Dashing, never Gelonda Shang Gelon Kenny, Lun Dinila, Gangbe Ti Yenshe, Jadang Go, Menshena, Babala Tukabadu, Mezon, Nazo Yakan, Yang, what Chita was into Soso Dode. 绿的了，你找到不得，什么的说的，不熏的、下的、旧的、日的、日月刚包的、看包的、硬的、切包的、老的、轻包的、旧包的、黏包的、刚包的、七色的、七包的、白干的、拿的、叉的、木质的、小的、米质的、小的、绿的、那的、粗细的、金的、有的、有些、改良的的，本来主那说就看那的。 Solo dan juda, masan tiu dan, masan tiu tang, til dan, jenju soja kan ne tini, migdan de mig chiti tana, dini, solo yeno, dini, ju yeno, dini, masan tiu yeno, dini, masan tiu yeno, dini, ti yeno, dini, jebu yeno, shi, gelonda, teshindu gelonga lu dini la, Gangbe Ti Yenshe Zhadang Go Menshena, Babala Tukabadu, Mezawa Nazo Ye Kangwa, Yang Daba, Chidawa Shindu Susu Dode, Lu Nila Ne Zhada Budang, Sheso Ne, Jina Yodo, She Zada Nangi Sheso Ne, Gelonda, Tedar, Gelone Lula, Luji Jesu Dashi Neba Yin, Gelonda, Shanyang Gelonga Lu Dini, Chidar Neba, Chidar, Shagwa Kamji Yang Dawa Chidawa Shindu Susu Dobar Chedi, Lu Nila Nisaya Kanda, Chuya Kanda, Maya Kanda, Luga Kanda, Yodo Oshi Gelon Nida Tepena, Palang Sewang, Palang Sebe, Loma Kebe, Chun Nibu, Palang Sene, Shindu Chambu No Tumbu Shagde, Nugdu Susu Dobar, Tishindu, Gelon Da, Gelon Kene Lu Dini, Chidar Neba Chidar Shagwa Kamji Yang Dawa Chidawa Shindu Susu Dobar Chedi, Lu Nila Nisaya Kanda, Chuya Kanda, Maya Kanda, Luga Kanda, Yodo Oshi, Dadana Nangi Lula Luji Jesu Dawa Neba Tang, Sheso Ne, Gelonda, Tishindu Geloni, Lula Luji Jesu Dashi Neba Yeno, Gelonda, Shanyang Bena Didati, Gelon Kene Tujudu Pora Ro, Shine Shashi Lembang, Shine Shani Lembang, Shine Shasung Lembang, Number Pambang, Number Mebang, or the number Deva Medro, Number Nabata Tona, Tayini, Lun Dian Didebi Chujanda, Didebi Rushijan, Didewule Mandeba, she, lün di ya su tedang jor chedos tedar nangi sheso ne gelong da tedar gelong ni lula luji chisu ta shen neba yendo gelong da shen a penan di di gelong ge ne tuju tu po ro charo nam je saom chunla nam je saom chagu da ge saom chagaga nam je saom ki nam je saom da da ge saom kung nam je saom chengge da ge saom sonsha ji ribu sonsha ji rik naba naso da ge sao tongwa na teyi ni lun di yang di debi chushen dang di debi rangshi che yin di debi le mande ba wo shi lun di ni yang su tedang chowa che do tedang nangi she so ne gelong da tedang gelong ni lu le lu ji chisu ta shen neba yin gelong da shen gelong ke ne tu tu du song po le ro ribe king ru sha da cha da che gibe zhe wa da tong na she so nga ma shin da ribe king ru da sha da cha ro ri cha kwa me shi gibe zhe wa da tong na she so nga ma shin da ribe king ru da sha da cha da che shi gibe zhe wa da tong na she so nga ma shin da river gibe gibe ma zhe wa cha da so na bo to wa de la be river nam shen na gang be river nam ja shen na ya Longbu riba namja shana, jangar yi riba namja shana, la yi riba namja shana, gebe riba namja shana, sigme riba namja shana, gesi yi riba namja shana, bungbe riba nam shana, jingbe riba nam shana, jambe riba nam shana, soyi riba nam shana, goyo teba shana, tongwa na, teyi ni lun diyan didebi chushendan, didebi rangshichan didebu la mandeba shi lun diyi jan tsu teta chawar chedo os. Da digi lu dungewe rangshinba di samlu tangu toba. Ane lu chashe tuman dibe rangshinba idusane lu ji kongbu di do statun zana ane rangsambar shiki medaba dele koaligido wa. Shena wada dusri.
So now the sutra then goes on to contemplation of the different aspects of the body that make up our body, and the importance of bringing awareness into the specific parts of our body in a very distinct way. An analogy given here is in a marketplace when you have many different types of varieties of grain, and if you look at each of these, you are able to identify distinctly what types of grain this is. So a meditator, when contemplating the body, looking at the specific parts of the body, identifies and contemplates on the specific parts of body as they are. And furthermore, it points towards understanding that ultimately the body, all of these parts are composed of impure substances, which are not worthy to be attached to, not worthy to be attracted to. And part of that contemplation also involves another aspect, which is to reflect upon how at the final level, our body is composed of the four elements, the elements of earth, water, fire, and so on. And, what we think as a real thing, like a body, something that is, independent and solid, is actually divisible in these different elements that make it up together. And then the meditation takes us to contemplation on the charnel ground by looking at body corpse, which is in various different stages of decomposition, as well as body parts that have been kind of cut, split open, and so on and so forth. And the point here is to, by visiting the charnel ground, viewing the body, bringing awareness, being mindful, recognizing the various stages of decomposition that we see, but then relating to it to our own body and say that this body is of the same nature. So this here refers to our own body. This body is of the same nature, will become like that. it is not exempt from that state. So what this is pointing us to is, by using this meditation, contemplation, we are also pointing towards recognizing the nature of suffering, recognizing the nature of suffering. So this is an important point of this kind of meditation. And indirectly, this kind of meditation also points towards the teaching on no self, because underlying our attachment to body is an assumption of some kind of independent body that is out there, that is real, that is worthy to be attached to, that is mine. But when you are able to contemplate on the nature of body being composed of so many parts, so beyond these parts that make up the body, there is no body that is separate from the parts that make it up. So this deconstruction or reduction of body into different parts through contemplation is also a helpful practice for deconstructing our attachment that assumes that there is an independent body that is graspable, that is worthy of attachment. So in this way, it's also pointing towards the teaching on no self, anatta.
대달다 류 잡아내 샤스니 류긴다도 상물던 류를 지 현샤래야로 저제디 수송자 영서로 전에 개체의 초 잡아니샤 초 대화를 초 동을 민두부 접지 쳐고 될 때는 상랑 남자께로 지 현대님도로 차도께서 저제디 다파 요구요 인도산에 초 잡아니샤 다 상당히 초디도 전에 가서 보게 또 심도서 상당히 타직도 초 대화를 현대화도 초 동을 민두별로 기아 뜻을 수송도야 초 잡아니샤 류 잡아니샤 초 잡아니샤 엔데네 다 초디도 뜻을 때야 됐다 심기 요구요 인도산에 다 제 심 잡아니 있었어야 되기 애니 봐도 실차르다네 심기 때문에 더버 애니 가서 그게 이도 오지를 세외 유지를 배 당돌해야게 차고 애니 동행어야 그를 옆에 겹기 소안에 면도 겹기 소에 로 당로 저저리 봐도 쓰임지다지 심 잡아니 있어 다 되네마 애니 최 전번이셔 스전에 다 되게 차단께서 유디즈들이 건드지 이미 파도 실사고 돌아 삼다 애니 심 디두디에 실사고 돌아 삼다는 전에 애니 조조서 매드버지기 애니 간다다 타르도나 애니 더 우무베 슝네 송야게 다 민점 다점 사디가로 조데게도가 도스전 삼던기요리.
So through first contemplating body and cultivating mindfulness based on this, already when we do the contemplation, mindfulness of the body, there will be an impact on the lessening of our attachment, because a large part of our attachment is based upon attraction to things that are connected with our body. So that is an important one. But more importantly, after contemplation of the body, one needs to move to feeling, because a part of the problem really comes from our attachment to pleasurable sensations and our natural aversion to unpleasurable experiences and sensation. So we react to the world through this modality of attraction and aversion, and underlying that modality is an attachment towards or craving towards a pleasurable experience and aversion towards something that we don't like. So the feeling is, it becomes important, and mindfulness practice on feeling, focused on feeling, will allow us to be less extreme in our reaction to, pleasure and pain and, happiness and suffering, so that there is less kind of anxiety, because underlying craving is a lot of anxiety, and also and along with it also comes jealousy and many of the other problems. So beyond body, one needs to tackle the attachment to feeling. So that's the second part. And then if we go deeper, again, where do these attachment to feeling come from? Why are we reacting to feelings, pleasurable and unpleasurable, in this way? We will come to recognize that underlying this is really our state of mind, different disturbed states of mind and various states of mind. And also, a large part of the attachment is constructed by the mind's attraction towards an object and sort of, a construction or a superimposition of attractiveness to things in the world. So it's the mind that brings conceptualization and adds attributes to things. And it's the mind that is doing a lot of the work. So by looking at the mind, one brings differentiation, because mind is not one monolithic state. We need to bring differentiation to mind that are more in the category of attachment leaning, attraction leaning, mind that are more in the category of aversion, which manifest in extreme form as anger, hatred, and so on. So when we are able to move from feeling to mind, we are now looking at a deeper level of the states of motivation, intention, and emotions, and so on. So now, when we move from the mind meditation to the mind object, mental objects, then we are really getting to a subtler state where, in fact, even though the text may not explicitly state this, but we are moving towards something like the teaching on anatta or shunyata as presented in the Madhyamaka teachings. Because what we come to recognize is that many of the things that we believe to exist out there are constructs of our mind. And by recognizing constructs as constructs, we also recognize that there is nothing solid with the reality, independent existence out there. And in this way, the whole basis for attachment will be undermined. So we can see in the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, a progressive or progression of deeper understanding of body moving to feeling, then to mind, and then finally to mental objects or phenomena.
Tadi Nedin Darish Denja something Yori, Sawshiru, or the Chushudi Denja Jojo, Gabumeba, Gemeba, Chene, Molo Dune, Nyambeche, Gangani, Gabumeba Gemo, and Tulu Dune, Chabameba, Dameba, and Don. You don't remember, and all me one drummer, and dollar turn tate to me, tenjimi. Or the teddy, Drawata, your she Senji Jengi, and Dredge, don't want you can't do, and some touch. Thing in Dutch, or the Zawshir could choose to join the in Dutch something here. So
in my own daily practice, one of the key meditations I do is based on the opening salutation verse in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, where Nagarjuna pays homage to the Buddha for teaching the truth of dependent origination in terms of emptiness. And there, in the Sholaka, Nagarjuna talks about how the teaching on no self or emptiness is presented from the point of view of the nature of things themselves, where the sort of belief in the arising and cessation in an intrinsic way is negated. From a temporal perspective, then belief in enduring permanence or believing in annihilation after existence is negated. And then from the point of view of activity, intrinsic going and intrinsic coming are negated. And then from the point of view of labeling, then the grasping to things as being distinct or separate, or identity and difference is negated. And then Nagarjuna goes on to say that to you, the great teacher who has taught this truth of dependent origination in terms of the absence of these, extremes, I pay homage. So this is an important stanza for me, and I chant it regularly, daily basis, and meditate on its meaning.
Yeah, that's enough. Totally.
So we will now have the question and answers. Yeah.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. This is indeed a blessed teaching program to have a great teacher by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, to teach and share with us this progressive path to realization through the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So we have many questions from the monastic as well as ladies from audience to ask His Holiness. But due to time constraint, we can only take a few questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. So this is a gentle reminder for you. When you ask the question, please unmute the mic. And after questioning, remember to mute again the mic and keep the video open. We shall keep the room calm and creating a conducive learning environment so that our mind feel joy and happiness. Your Holiness, Venerable Pundarit Sri Punyo from Thailand is not available now. So allowing me to ask the question on his behalf. His Holiness, do you have any advice for Dharma learners to know we are on the right path? Thank you.
Tadi, 제발 산지기 최사디 대바지고 모임바 컨트롤단디 이디스 삼당고 이디자는 게라 로션샤디 샤 개셔버리 에네 투중기 싫어 섬중기 싫어 곰중기 싫어 쓰는 도 슬레임부터가 저서 토마토 섬자디 시부지 개셔버리샤 에네 장수 추조즈 다 지금 빨리 중요내리 에네 레자가 중요내리 되게 로션 나야디 숙셔스나로 나서는 쉬야이.
So, when we are talking about the path and Dhamma practice in the Buddhist context, we are talking about an approach of a spiritual path that is not based on devotion and faith alone. What is required also is an understanding and knowledge. So this is very important for the Buddhist path. And here, as I explained yesterday, there is an understanding that a genuine understanding of the Dharma arises in a gradual way through the 3 stages of understanding of first through study and learning, second through contemplation and integration, and third through meditative cultivation. So my request to all of my colleagues, Dharma friends, is to really not ignore the importance of studying, to study the Dharma, whether it is Pali text or whatever Sanskrit tradition or whatever tradition that you are engaged with. It is important to study and cultivate the knowledge and then contemplate. That is something that I would like to share.
디 제르미스 송마르베 당부 자진 토바 망도제 바로 중루 탐제 담버셔 타마니즈 건도 냐소라 그게 담버제베 최동호 사디 다 님부 뒤셔버셔.
So, for example, the great Tibetan master Tsongkhapa, the 14th century master, sums up his biography, autobiography in the following way. He said, at first, I cultivated, wide learning through study. And secondly, I ensured that all the teachings of the Buddha dawned upon me as personal instructions. And then Third, I then engaged day and night in meditative cultivation. And in this way, I've been able to dedicate all of my virtues to the flourishing of the Dharma and well-being of sentient beings. So that really sums up what a true practitioner's life should look like.
퇴사 맞으나 퇴바 매베 공부니 럭동 차를 제거 자스 진짜 숨수요래.
So there's a Tibetan saying that a meditation without learning is like someone with no fingers trying to climb a rock.
Oh yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable People Kamo Gesopon from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Venerable, with my highest respect to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, refer to the world crisis, and many people, they got the problem and they don't know how to find a way to make them peacefulness. So my question is, how we apply the Maha Satipatthana Sutta to make them become a peacefulness again? Thank you.
디터기야나 시스머리 류 잠반이샤 아니 전에 초 잠반이샤 전에 심 잠반이샤 전에 취 잠반이샤스 도다 토마 라바체 전에 류레다 심도스 야 차르주요레 류 잠반이샤 초 잠반이샤 심 잠반이샤 전에 네 취 잠반이샤스 도스 상당나 좀 전에就是맞아 지금 모르기 진짜 루주리아 치번나 시선에 타마 라번에도 야우슈치도가 저상하다 디삼다다 디로종제 아니 디도네 이 삼다다 샤바존나 다가지도.
So as I already mentioned how when practiced properly, the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, can be a very powerful path. We already talked about how contemplation on the body, bringing mindfulness and awareness onto the body, can really create a basis for living a more peaceful life. And when you look at the Satipatthana, a structure, what we see is a gradual progression. First, from the focus on the body, which is easier and it's more obvious. The object is more evident and obvious. Then gradually moving into feeling, which is still comparatively subtle, but compared to mind, it's still easier to focus on. And then moving on to mind, which is subtler, and then gradually to the mind objects of the mind. So in this way, there's something very beautiful in the natural progression from what is easier and more evident and obvious object to a progressively subtler and elusive object. And if you think about it, this is truly a great compassion and kindness on the part of our teacher, the Buddha. It's almost as if he laid out a path where we are being instructed from the beginner stage, like a kindergarten and a primary school education, then gradually being led us through the advanced higher levels of education. So if you can afford to spend time, study, and then engage in contemplation, there will be the basis for a peaceful mind and peaceful life.
아주 비긴하리야. 아니 근주 부디 자시다. 아니 대주 부디 인기스 저래. 어다 디디게 로 장다디리 배 배싱에 들로토리 세리도 tumbo. 뭐에는 tumbo는 또 스마트다지. 쉬우야고래샤. 다 개지시 소소롬니자데 배 캐시부리.
So in the Tibetan tradition, for example, our canonical collection is quite large. So the sutta collection, or the scripture attributed to the Buddha, contains over 100 volumes. And then the commentarial collection, which is known as Tengyu, contains over 200 volumes. And I often tell people, which I truly believe, that if you look at the content of these teachings, they are actually very close to a scientific way of thinking about things. You know, it's really about understanding the nature of reality, understanding the nature of our own existence. So by spending time to cultivate the knowledge, to study them, and then bring them into contemplation is a worthy pursuit.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Dr. Nima Senaragne from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Morning, His Holiness Dalai Lama. Ayubowan. My question is, breathing is an involuntary action. Don't you think if you make it a voluntary action, will slow down our creative and active mind, diverse in mental energy to an unnecessary task? Thank you very much. Bhoma Stuti.
Tadi 우중우 장장 개수부지게 말와 가당한서 우중 그뒤네 있다 조차 년도 걸거리네 우중 용기열와 자상가다 생기 또 우리야 미니 아니 심파 네트도 샤나 아니 심게다 가서 그렇게 잡아니 월샤와 디도스 남중아서 로디 베트칼 미국 잠만들도 토르다 하버도에 나서 공연 시험했으나 근데 치르기 수저로 사월을 민네 아니 로들레 연구여봐 미긴치가 얼봐 다 예루디 콜 삼다 중구여봐 다 예루디 아니 공연 시험에 되게 로로 차대버 디디기 쉬고 뭐시부시 콜 예루 코란 거 간에도 some says some rigsum did those number shower surgery do Satipatthana depend on the
So the point is, it's the point of mindfulness, of breathing meditation, is not that breathing is such a sacred thing or it's something that is special or something amazing. The point is to recognize something that we naturally and normally do as part of our human existence. And by using that natural human activity, effortless activity, as a way of anchoring our attention training. So what we are doing is we are bringing conscious attention to something that we do effortlessly by using that experience as a way of anchoring our attention. So when we are able to anchor our attention, then we learn to apply our mind. We learn to cultivate the mental discipline, because otherwise, what happens is that, most of the time, our mind chases after the sensory objects. So of course, we have 5 sensory consciousness, and then we have the mental consciousness. All the 5 sensory experiences are always chasing after external objects of the 5 senses. And even the mental consciousness, which is manas, the 6th mental faculty, is supposed to be really about mind. But even then, for most of the time, the mental faculty also, mental consciousness also chases after what the sensory experiences give you. So we tend to be so externally oriented. So by choosing to consciously focus on a breath, what we are doing is to learning a skill to be able to refrain from chasing after the senses and retain the mental consciousness and cognition to remain at the manas level. And in this way, what happens is a kind of a quietening of a mind takes place. Gradually, as the mind rests and settles, we then begin to experience what consciousness is, which is pure experience in the form of luminosity, just simple awareness. And in this way, one could say one almost is able to cultivate what could be called a state of equipoise. So that, and when we are able to cultivate that kind of ability to consciously apply our mind through a disciplined attention, there's a real benefit. There's a real benefit from this.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Chitani Bara Surya from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, it's look like that there is an inseparable connection between Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana. Why is it not possible to make them one? Thank you very much.
Yeah, some trouble is just Migbo Chi Suzuro Sobohi membership. Kanda Yuludene some says on Rizam Jig Lodi Gala some Pagita, the native Chinese. Ding yala chujan song. That in a Dendrig sem digi, any she drawn the Dendrig Dagger to say into Zan any some Gigi Judrag and Metawada any other Dendrig Jigby Chujan some time into Jidan doing our digital Lane Gurva. Any church of Shadi Leomage. Some Tabajas, the Church sorry. Then a church of Shadus and D. Any casualty to some done. That's also church of Shadus. That's some trouble chatting in the church song.
So one way of looking at the relationship between mindfulness on the mind and mindfulness on the mental objects or mind objects is to really view the two, mind and mental objects, as basis and its attribute. So when you are cultivating mindfulness on the mind, what you are seeking is some ability to recognize what the mind itself is. And in order to do that, one needs to be able to move beyond, sort of objectification of body or attachment to feelings. One needs to sort of move beyond those two stages and then find a way to quieten one's mind and then remain equipoised and try to sort of experience that state of absence, which is just a clear knowing and pure awareness. So it's like the basis, and then the mindfulness on the mind objects is more like then reflecting on the attributes of that mind. So for example, like when you analyze the going and coming of that mind, when you analyze the arising and cessation of that mind, that movement, then we begin to recognize attributes like impermanence, no self, and so on. So ultimately, the most important practice is the fourth Satipatthana, practice, the fourth mindfulness, which is the phenomena, the nature of reality. So in simple way, one can say that the relationship between these two is that first one is establishing the basis for recognizing the mind, and then the fourth one is now recognizing the attributes, abiding on the attributes of the mind, such as impermanence, no self, and so forth.
and those some ship chas na some charak yaw cha yore and rabo lubu sem and nyum hiji give sems chasanga rabo lubu sem ya and roshin ja ju kundo di shig duga na roshin tobo sosum chebe roshin tobo shibju nyedo roshin tobo dun chene oda roshin ja ju tobo di badu gabe jele ya and some sesam rigzamgi and that ya and 나지 토숨 쓴 셰샤디리 딘레기다 심 타라 야치아도와 다디도 유르부 공부이나 에네 걸리 섬이야 디리 소용돼야지다 에네 나지 토숨 그 문지도 용돼야지 디안다 세두기 내고기 에네 동보성 상당의 디ኛ라 베스로스네면도 냐라 지고 kumji tangpu tensa di ni kuwe kuduliya semgi rakpati di paa kale paa shini thoma kongay shiba di paa ka tene chawa loi tene chara di paa do usro raji tama semgi wese shate yaji desu ya kumji ru dosu ya na ku chi tsoro yonde ya da So in
the Indo-Tibetan tradition, in understanding the nature of mind, as I mentioned yesterday, there is even a discussion of recognizing different levels of subtlety of mind and consciousness, and the movement of the mind connected with its energy. So, for example, there is an understanding of how we can move from grosser level of mind, such as the sensory experiences, to the manas. And within the manas, there's a lot of conceptual processes, thought processes, and those are still grosser level. And there's a whole list of what is referred to as the 80 conceptions that are indicative of different states of mind. So each of these are correlated to a progressive level of deepening. So there is quite a lot of distinctions, and meditators, the yogis, actually learn to recognize what the indications of the different levels of dissolutions are. And part of that practice involves using sleep as a way of training the mind, because when we begin to fall asleep, our sensory modalities are less active. So the mind is already settling down and quietening down. And so then, yogis actually use the sleep experience and process as a way of recognizing how the mind is behaving, how the mind is expressing itself in different levels of subtlety. And in this way, as you go into the actual sleep, you are still able to maintain your awareness. And then, of course, the aim is eventually to be able to recognize when these deeper states arises naturally, especially such as at the point of death, as mentioned yesterday. So, for example, like the 4 stages, each of them are associated. The first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, and they are referred to as the stage of appearance. So each of these first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, altogether making 80 conceptions, which then dissolve and culminate in the experience of clear light. So when the 3rd stage, which is associated with the 7 conceptions, cease, then what is referred to as the innate mind, the innate fundamental, innate mind arises. And that is the most basic, most fundamental state of consciousness. And the yogi, an experienced yogi will be able to still maintain awareness at that stage.
Oh yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Praboda Nirukshi from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, I am asking, is Satipatthana meditation samatha or vipassana? Thank you.
신대다 항동스야디 미국에는 여치기 요마리 코칸다 미국당 거 토네 신내스도도 잡아 마시버체 심지지도 나야 내베토네 삼다 에네 항동스로도 잡아치야치기 신내스야디 에네 가서다 심지지도 내네 드라지다 항동스야디 에네 신내 제시도 내베토네 에네 유로 소소도 싫어 자야디 자곰 는 항동사들이
So the primary distinction between shamatha and vipassana or vipassana, tranquil abiding and insight, it's not defined by differences in the object of meditation. The object of meditation can be the same. It is differentiated by the style of meditation. So in the shamatha type meditation, the main approach is a single pointedness and settledness of mind and focus. So there is no discursivity. Whereas vipassana style meditation involves inquiry, like, more the wisdom aspect of the mind, inquiry, analysis, discursiveness, and critical, inquiry. So, and this is why in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we speak of non-discursive meditation or resting meditation and analytic or discursive meditation. And they are correlated to the shamatha style or vipassana style. And you need to combine both. So for example, in the Satipatthana practice, we see both of these approaches are used in a combination way. So Satipatthana practice, the mindfulness practice contains both elements of both tranquil abiding and insight.
Oh yeah. Now next, get away.
Thank you, His Holiness. There's still remaining two more questions from the floor. We now invite Venerable Arloka, Myanmar, to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning, Your Holiness. My name is Arloka from Myanmar. I'm very happy getting opportunity to ask question to you. So today my question is, Your Holiness, when people ask you conflictable question or the negative question, how do you apply mindfulness, sati, not to be angry? Thank you very much, Your Holiness. Thank you.
Did you get your money? Me jaga kabaz, ane kasure. The room drama the mongu to do soon, je. Ane Benanda umujugu shu de tiyi shesin samu jigrun de mongu yili joyi ngabo dojun de sanja chen shegi to su chumi ju sine susane ane yin yin de choje lambo de ane choje chawo lo so bo de zedi ane sanja shambu sha redi minjiang dayo zang ge dekona ni de chen to shu yo ma re sin su do ti to kodo lo su yo re mo de ya mo ge be ke ke marwa the Shimju Shadi, Kawanzu Suna Lolia,
So when questions like this are asked, to me personally, it doesn't really bother me, and because I actually admire the critical inquiry tradition that is part of the great Nalanda Indian tradition, where there is a lot of debate back and forth. So debate is a primary. Can someone mute the microphone? So so the debate is a primary modality in which discourse takes place. So the critical inquiry, exchange back and forth, is part of that tradition. For example, the 7th century great master Chandrakirti, in his Entering the Middle Way, towards the end, actually explicitly says, after having explained his philosophy of emptiness and his interpretation of Nagarjuna's teachings, says that the profound truth that has been presented here is so profound that even some great learned ones who have spent so much time studying the Dharma have been unable to fathom this truth. And in that list, he includes great masters like Vasubandhu and Dignaga and Dhammakirti as well. So this is the tradition that I come from. So critical inquiry and debate is part and parcel. So I don't get annoyed or bothered by difficult questions. Yeah.
His Holiness, this is the last question. We now invite Venerable Dr. Diti Sampano from Indonesia to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Honorable Sir, Your Holiness, Namo Buddhaya, my respectful to Your Highness. I'm very happy I can join this teaching, and then I have some experience about Satipatthana. Actually, my question is about Dhammanupassana, but before I heard that there is some audience, she asked about this Dhammanupassana too. And then my question is, how about how to practicing Vipassana or Satipatthana during we have some ritual ceremony. Sometimes because we must unite our mind and our mental body, but in other time we must reciting of parita or mantra or etc. Like this.
Pejidi, ada meda dunga don ame shudi, peji chogyosare. Tishi meda le dunga le ne dame song. Chene dao kurim du sen rote doa. Kada da thoma chig meda was lebduzane, nazuda kasore. Le taboso le ne chig sha to aruchi. Ene ko kiji ki gyurra da tzu chedi ko the no she could demi rangjuji medabashi could good again mongulo done yonko ajigi meda any tadi jidang anzo do she in zane kada kiji jigdra di medawa rangshi any tadi anzo tadeji lusim gna dang di she in zane dunge rangshi meda dunge da di po rangshi yago zayo na ane dongbo da di zu long chobo bu ane da dongbo da te ni nyaor lembe lu di di ane pege dongbo chigi kada kansa dame da chuji dame komya di peji ligi yare.
So in the case of, the fourth Satipatthana, the fourth one, which is the meditation on mind to object, in my personal understanding is that what is crucial is really contemplation on the 4 attributes of suffering, truth of suffering, impermanence, nature of suffering, dukkha, and empty, and then no self. So, and those 4 are actually, there's a kind of a progression from one to another. So the first one is impermanence. And impermanence is something, even though the subtle level of impermanence is difficult to, experience, but at least on the grosser level, impermanence is something that we can easily point to and easily, relate to, because we know things in our life, things around us, they break, they come into being, they're dependent on other factors, they come and go. And then by reflecting upon impermanence, one thing that will become clear as you deepen your contemplation is that impermanence indicates there is no autonomy, because impermanence means something is dependent upon causes and conditions, and anything that is dependent upon causes and conditions cannot have ultimate autonomy or independence. And once you recognize that, this can open up to, especially in relation to our own existence, understanding of the suffering. And then once you deepen our understanding of suffering, nature of suffering, which is actually having no control over our own fate because of karma and afflictions, then, we will recognize that in this kind of reality, there is no place for a real owner, a real agent, a real self. And if there is no real self, then how can there be possessions belonging to that real self? And in this way, ultimately from the Indo-Tibetan tradition point of view, it is pointing towards the teaching of shunyata, in the emptiness of all phenomena. So in my understanding, the 4th, Satipatthana practice, the 4th mindfulness practice really seems to be pointing towards the fundamental truths of our existence and reality.
남시 메요 구이면 그래 오마르지종 기부섬이 추모에 메면 농거면 남가면 남시 메요 구이면 텔레셔나 기부광스 다디 dom디 견연데 기부컴준 되베시 양다 모에 지다와 대신 컴는 저런 두신 양다 니도 민스 어디디 엔지나스가 삼던 거래 저 두스파 삼다 연데 에네 징아이 류 나이 셈 나이 나스니 타녀도 고다 가다디 담버레 여르디 이네 나이 류도 나이 셈 나이 나스니 다고장에 나티 삼다 연데 에네 천이야 메드비치 다디 에네 셈삼보다 데제기 다 우모정집에 서로 셋이 얘기 남시 쓰니 일류되네 강사하게 지금게 덕시로 셋이로 두신 소용 그야래 다 텐주의 로기 디디 민장 따여서 마도 그게 유용은 주부시 때문에 봐 아도 우모주고 책이 샤야 오르샤 개들하게 천이 된주는 대도 그 뭐부지비시 돈이 뭐부지비 유인 되는 게 되시는 관심 뭐부지다 남잖아 뒤니 딱전 거를 서류도 내니 뭐이 뒤시직된기 타냐잖아 나버 재미샤 뒤니 그 소식고 건식이 다다셔를 겨워지면 봐 그래서 타냐되냐 그러면 최 겨워한 게 이모주로서 다 뒤디 시우지 내니다를 삼던 거다디 시우지 계속 모르셔
So in my own meditation practice, on a daily basis, I chant this, certain stanzas from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, Ratnavali, where he says that the person is neither the earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, and so on. So he goes through the 6 elements that make up our existence and says none of these are the person. But if none of these are the person, where is the person? The person isn't independent of them either. And then he goes on to say that the person is, the concept of person arises only in dependence upon the combination of these elements. And these two stanzas are really powerful because it points out very powerfully the sort of the assumptions that we normally make is unfounded. When we talk about my body, my feeling, my speech, we assume there is an owner that is me who actually, owns these, to whom speech, mind, and body belongs to. But when you examine using this kind of analysis that Nagarjuna presents us, we don't really find, who these things belong to. There is no person. But having said that, on the conventional level, on the basis of everyday experience and day-to-day popular convention, it is true. There is me and there is you. A person has feelings, a person has speech, and so on. But then the question arises, what exactly is that person? When we say I, what is the term referring to? What is the thought I am referring to? So on this question of what exactly is the person, there's a lot of discussion in Buddhist tradition. For example, Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and other traditions, accept that the person is a construct, but what the concept of person is referring to is the continuity of the consciousness. But Madhyamaka Prasangika basically rejects all of this, attempts to find something objectively real as the true referent of the term person or the thought I am, and basically says that the existence of person can only be understood at the level of nominal reality, as part of our conventions, part of the constructions that we, as part of our everyday experience, construct as for our convenient use for our everyday experiences. But there is nothing beyond this level of conventional reality which is objectively real. That is the reference of the person. So and here, Chandrakirti has powerful arguments, particularly in entering the middle way. There's a key section where he presents three important consequences for those who believe there is something that is objectively real out there. And Chandrakirti presents these contradictions to any notion of believing in something independent and intrinsic reality that is out there, that has an objective basis. So those teachings are really powerful, and in my own personal practice, I contemplate them deeply on a daily basis. So thinking of this, what we find in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, there are two stanzas which is really provides a grand summary of the teaching on Shunyata, where he says that, that whatever is dependent originated, that we call and declare to be empty. And what is empty is dependently designated, and this is the middle way. And then, therefore, and there is nothing that is there is nothing that is dependently originated. There is nothing that is not dependent originated, and there is nothing that is not empty. Because there is nothing that is empty. So those two, stanzas really provide a very grand summary of the importance of the teaching on emptiness. So when I mention names like Nagarjuna and Chantakrithi, particularly the two of them, I feel very close to them. There's a sort of a deep emotional connection. And I feel almost as if, especially in relation to Nagarjuna, when Nagarjuna was alive and active in the 2nd century, I may have been one among those who are in the far corners in his congregation, sitting somewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. We have come to an end of our Day 2 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful 2-day teaching program listening to His Holiness, the encouraging and inspiring Dharma talk given at the right time and be able to associate with the great masters. Just like what His Holiness has said, we are followers of the Buddhas, but over years, due to differences in respective cultures and lack of communication, interaction, and dialogue among Buddhist traditions, particularly in between Pali tradition and Sanskrit traditions, we are as if separated, with no communication at all, and sometimes misunderstanding occur. However, we are very blessed living in this modern technological era. It seems there is a revival in our interaction again, having opportunity to learn from each other and get to know each other. All this interaction helps to promote for a long-lasting benefits and happiness of the Buddha Sasanas. Though we are coming from different traditions, the teaching of the foundation of mindfulness is there. The practice and the path is there. One practice, there is only one taste experience. That is a taste of liberation. That is a cessation of suffering. That is Nibbana. Therefore, the path is one. Pardon me if I'm wrong. There is no Mahayana, no Theravada, no Vajrayana. There is only the teaching of suffering and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So before we end for this wonderful and a very fruitful 2-day teaching program, we would like to invite the most venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nagatero, Secretary General, Asgiriya Chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka, to give a closing remarks. Please unmute your mic, please.
Namo tassa bhagavatu arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Semata Tiruvan Saranai. Atipujya Dalai Lama Etulu Garutara Maha Sangya Vahansa Sadahavatuni Api Iyed Adat Edindina Tulama Atipujya Dalai Lama Isin Desanakala Satipatthana Sutra Desanavata Ima Igan Vimata Api Homa Unanduing Ehun Kandumna Maybe Limanda Unandua Dakona Loke Boho Kenekuta Unhansege Medesanavatuling on the Aubodiak Vetahimak Labaganata Avastava Salasuna. Me Satipatthana Sutri Genvina Eutum Dharma Karunu Api Egdinakata Pamanak Neme Api Jivite Hamadama Praguna Kalaitu Baba Api Edulin Hundata Vatahagat Tatagata Lutura Budrajanan Vansi Vasara Didas High Sigata Pamana Pera Desanakala me Satipatthana Sutra Desanava He Antargataya Manghitanawa Nitara Puhunu Kirima Loki Api Baudhyan Hetieta Hamotama Itama Vedagat they are Ketiet. Eva Gamer Mima again Mima Udek Apita Praju Nikwasi Bhavita Kalaitu again Mima Bhavi Tabang Pasing Dakpana Karete Nitara Bhavita Kalaitu Praguna Kalaitu Puhunu Kalaitu again Mima Edisa මෙවන් වසංගත තත්ත්වයක් ලෝකේ පවතින වෙලාවක දලයිලා අතිපූජ්‍ය දලයි ලාමා විසින් මේ කළ දේශනාව මම හිතනවා අපි හැමෝටම ඉතාම වැදගත් වගේම මේ භාවනාව පිළිබඳ උනන්දුවක් ඇති අයට ඒ පිළිබඳ යොමු වීමෙන් නිතර ප්‍රායෝගිකව පුහුණු කිරීමෙන් අපි හැමෝටම මානසික තෘප්තියක් සතුටක් ඇති කරගන්න ඒ අවස්ථාවක් හැටියට අපි සලකනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ උතුම් කාර්යය සිදු කළ උන්වහන්සේට අපි බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ ශ්‍රවණය කළ බොහෝ දිනාට මේ ආශිර්වාදේ හැමත සිතක් සාන්තියක් වේවායි අපි ඉතින් ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරමු. ඒ නිසා මෙම මහා කාර්ය ලෝකුරා ප්‍රේක්ෂකයින්ට සදහැවතුන්ට ශ්‍රවණය කිරීමට අවස්ථාව සලසා දුන් උන්වහන්සේගේ කාර්යාලයේ සියලු කාර්ය මණ්ඩලයට ඒ වගේම සියලු සංවිධායකින්ට අග්නිගාසියාවේ සම්බන්ධීකරණ කාර්යාලයට සහ තාක්ෂණික කණ්ඩායම් වලට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම දානමාන පිරිනැමු සියලු සදහැවතුන්ටත් අපි ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලාංකික භික්ෂුන් වහන්සේලා හැටියට අති පූජනීය දලයි ලාමා තුමාට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වැඩ සිටින අති උතුම් දලදා හඳුරන්ගේ ආශිර්වාද විශේෂයෙන් අද උඳුවපුර 15ක් පොහොව දවස ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේ ලංකාවට වැඩම කළ දිනේ ඒ උතුම් ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේගේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් රත්නත්‍රයේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් උන්වහන්සේට නිදුක් නිරෝගී සම්පන්නිය චිරජීවනයේ ලැබේවායි අපි ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා. සුඛී දීඝායුකෝ භව.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Pali ki chuju da, tiki leksha ki chuju, samolo kanda tawa karta ki chakja shisayadi. Meda dunga tong dami shisayadi, tawa karta ki chakja shi. Tinga to samolo tumungu tohne, da, bagi, kaya cha, da, ishisha chadi yore. Meda dunga tong dami shi.
All the followers of the Buddha, when it comes to the understanding the nature of reality, we share our adherence to embracing what can be referred to as the 4 axioms or 3 axioms of Buddhism. These are impermanence, that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are the nature of suffering, and all phenomena are empty and are devoid of self. So these, acceptance of these, 3 or 4 axioms is fundamental to all the Buddhist traditions, whether it is Pali tradition or a Sanskrit tradition.
So once again, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. Once again, we are very grateful for His Holiness for teaching us the important teachings on Maha Satipatthana Sutta. And also we thanks to our professional technical teams and many volunteers involved from various parties, from various countries behind a scene to make this teaching program a very great success. His Holiness, we are looking forward to another teaching program by His Holiness. Let us join palm together to express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness and all of you online, and rejoice by saying 3 times in the Buddha's own word, Sadhu, Sadhu,
Sadhu,
Yeah.